go. All right, we are on the last two chapters, chapters 9 and 10. Next week, we meet with the authors, same time, same place. I sent some of the questions that were posted out already. So if you happen to have any more questions, just put them on the Facebook group and I can just copy and paste and send away. But Robert and Lori are both super excited, right, Lori? Yeah, are really excited to meet with us next week. And I am too. But before we go into our questions, let's open with prayer. God, thank you for your just beautiful creation and children and families. Lord, we've gone through this book. It's been kind of heartbreaking. Just thinking about trauma kids have gone through, but Lord, you've brought them to us. And I pray that you use us in a mighty way to make a difference in their lives, to make them feel safe, regulated, and loved, Lord, so that they see you. Be with us during this time of conversation. Lead, guide, and direct it. In your name we pray. Amen. All right. So we are on the last two chapters, chapters 9 and 10. And kicking off with question 1, it says, in the opening story, Pastor Kim steps in to help her team when 5-year-old Oliver becomes oppositional and aggressive. Which supportive discipline strategies does Pastor Kim use to minister to Oliver? How do you think the story might have ended differently if she had used a traditional approach, such as 3 strikes and you're out?
One of the things I've really noticed about discipline, and one of the things that I feel like I've heard lots of like meaning what I need to work on by when I say here, but she stayed like really regulated herself. Like that could be something that would really like set you over the edge to like respond, obviously not swearing back at him, but like respond in equal amount of anger and frustration. And instead she just like, she keeps her calm and she tries not to show how surprised she is. And she takes a deep breath and gets herself back regulated before she addresses his issues. Like, you know, before she tries to get him regulated. And then she like, you know, uses some of that stuff, uses her calm and then doesn't let him get away with it, but addresses it much more calmly, whereas I think a lot of people would have responded by like yelling back and escalating, like it would have escalated the situation.
I was torn between act and regulate, relate, and reason. I thought they both were pretty close in her responses to them. That I also was very impressed that she did not immediately just throw him in the hall and leave him out there for somebody else to come and get him. You know, she was the person to contact, but that she dealt with it very calmly and wasn't accusatory, but really laid the rules out that that's, you know, not something that they do. And that he was still, you know, felt welcomed in the group without being ostracized or shamed, certainly in front of the rest of the kids. And if that's what he hears at home, that's what he's going to come out with at church.
Yeah, I love the fact that she puts his well-being first and is really considering him at the center of the disciplinary actions. I love the whole, in some ways, this whole thing of, you know, getting alongside someone and trying to get to understand them and know their story before actually, before responding with assumptions. So I really like that.
I also agree with Becky. I felt like it was a mix of act, because she definitely acknowledged his frustration. And then she also, you know, just kind of guided him. Hey, is there a better way we can say that? So what a teachable moment she did with that. But then she also just sat there until he was calm enough to just, you know, just spill the beans or, you know, just let his emotions roll. this is something I'm working on, because sometimes I feel like I'm so quick to jump in because I want to help, I want to give the answer, and sometimes people just need that opportunity to just spill out whatever they're feeling in that moment. And I think by giving Oliver that, she made him feel safe. She made him feel heard, which he probably hadn't
Mm,
been. So I think what a great opportunity she took to teach, to help, to love, and to, make him feel heard. One of the thing I wanted to add too is, as I read this chapter, I very much felt like they were talking about like the church I grew up in. And I don't mean that in a negative way, but very much the three strikes you're out, very, rigid. And, um, you were expected to act as if you were an adult church, but just for kids. And I really love that, over time, we're really taking a step back and seeing how kids develop and how we can best reach them where they're at. Because we can't expect them to act like little adults. So this book has really helped me with that too, to how to address kids when they're in their meltdowns and things like that.
I saw a lot of similarities in some of the behaviors that were described in this book with kids with ADHD. Interesting, my grandson's name is Oliver, and I'm starting to read this account of Oliver, and I thought, boy, there are just a lot of similarities here. Maybe not so much with the abusive language or something like that, but the way he responds to criticism and being put in a corner or ostracized from the rest of the group is just very similar to some of what these trauma informed kids are going through. Traumatized kids, to what degree is ADHD trauma for these kids, not knowing how to understand or relate to their emotions and their responses. So it's really helped me to deal with him in a better fashion with what he's going through.
That was actually one of the questions for the authors for next week, is the approach with ADD or ADHD children. Is it then the same as trauma informed, although they are not trauma experienced, verbally, physically? Yeah. So interesting to hear what they'll have to say about that. I would imagine it's a very similar approach. All right, question 2. Suppose that you are running an event for children in the community. During game time, you overhear one of the boys using profanity. How would the assumptions of trauma-informed discipline apply in this situation? If the problem persisted, which supportive discipline strategies might you use to solve the problem? Is there any situation where you would allow a child to use profanity? If so, explain.
um, I suppose it's how I mean we've had this happen in our class before, where kids have kind of where they have used um, cuss words, and I'm just looking back and I'm thinking, when we ignore it first time, um, and then if it happens again, I would talk to the child, just take them aside. But yeah, I haven't really gotten to kind of know the backstory as to why that they do that. So yeah.
I definitely like the act limit setting. And I think in there too is part of a like another behavioral approach that I've been encouraged, which is like positive instructions instead of negative instructions. Like instead of saying don't use that kind of language, giving them language tools that they can use. But it makes a huge difference. Most of our community events are like family events. So there's like kids and parents there. And it's always an interesting dynamic when a kid does something inappropriate and their parent is there and their parent doesn't step in and say anything about it. But to be honest, and you guys probably are similar, I usually am not that intimidated. If a kid is doing something inappropriate, I'll still say something.
I think the name it and tame it feature for that one would be what I would go to, because I don't think it's ever appropriate to allow the child to use language that might be disruptive to the other kids. I think she talked in her assumptions, was it intentional? Was the purpose of it to be disruptive? But I would still call the child out privately and just explain that that's not language that we use here in church, and certainly would, probably hearing it from the parents. So it's difficult to know, do you go to the parents with this situation, or do you just tell the child that that's not appropriate for this church setting and that it's not honoring to God to speak in those terms? And, share Bible verses with the child that show that we're supposed to be in control of our emotions. And I would certainly address the anger, which promoted that comment, and deal with the anger first, and then from there go on to, what's appropriate and inappropriate language to use.
Sorry, what question are we on?
Number 2. The other, I also like how with the first story, how she acknowledged, like, Oliver, telling Oliver that profanity was not okay, that hurt her feelings. Is there another way that we can verbalize that? Because also depending on the kids and the age group, it could be a bunch of older kids who are trying to be cool and think they're funny by saying those bad words. And, in that situation, be like, I think there's another way that, we can say that you're not having fun, or that, something different, redirect them. Because that way you're calling out the problem, but giving them a solution on how to fix it, without embarrassing them, but I think it's also letting them know, obviously you're not okay with it. It's I think a really good tool for that. But obviously if it's an anger or frustration issue, giving the name it and tame it thing, because kids need to know that it's okay to be angry, but it's what we do with our anger. And we don't use vulgar language. We do ABC 1, 2, 3. So I think that's super helpful, giving them the tools.
Yeah, I like the redo strategy.
Oh, I was going to say, I think it's, I have a friend that works with kids that are at Title I school, that high school, that have really foul language. And this friend is the nicest, calmest person I know. But she said one day the band was playing outside in the hallway, and one kid that she has trouble with stood up and said, "Y'all are effing awful. Y'all need it, really bad." And my sweet friend looked at him and said, "That's not nice. They're really trying to boost our morale and do this and this, and we should say nice things." And, and then he turns around and goes, "Y'all are effing awesome." And that was his way, but it was a pot, and I said, she said, "Oh, that's good. You're being encouraging." And of course she's working with these kids daily, but that's where that makes a difference, because he'd never done something like that. And he took the thing to try to be positive. And now, she goes the next step, and hopefully, because these kids are really from places that I don't even want to begin to think of, and that's all they hear. And after you hear it all the time, that's kind of your language, it takes a while to unlearn it. And so it's, whether it's, it was never in my household, but friends that talk to their kids like that, and they just come around and say it like it's an everyday thing. I'm like, so you kind of have to just work with them, I guess, and think of positive ways, encourage them, say, that was a good thing to say, but we need to do better.
I don't know. I read this and I find that when kids use it, we don't need to make a big deal about it. Just a simple, we don't use that language here. And when they're like, what a word do I use? Be like, figure something out. But I think that when we make big deals out of things like the language that they're choosing to use, because there's multiple reasons why they could be. It could be that's like you had said, Evelyn, like that's just what they hear every single day. As far as they're concerned, the F word is actually just, it's as simple as saying apple or it's just an adjective. And so I think, I mean, there is a place where we get to teach children that there is a place for that. And it's the same with my daughter when we fight over her clothing, like, no, you cannot show all of your skin off in church. This is a place where you need to dress respectably. Like, this is what dressing in church looks like. This is what dressing in school looks like. This is what language in church looks like. But usually kids are pretty good when you're like, hey, we don't use that language here. And you just keep going. They'll either correct it. I get that, like, the kid is probably ticked off and stuff, and that there probably needs to be a conversation about that. But in the moment, that's not the kind of language we use here. They usually correct, quite quickly, like, okay, or they'll find a different word that they'll use instead, but it's not as offensive. And I think a big part would be that knowing that hard, if it's just some random kid that you have popping in. Yeah, I feel like, just not drawing much attention to it. And you can announce it, like, we don't use that language, and keep going because other kids have heard it. And I think sometimes, especially words of profanity, we can get really caught up in correcting it. And I mean, it's when they use the Lord's name in vain, there is reason to go off and be like, this is what God says. But if we're being honest, the rest of that is just toilet language that is deemed inappropriate. All of those swears do have meanings that we don't use anymore. We use them now as profanity. I remember in grade 6, that's what my grade 6 teacher did. She sat us down and she's like, here's what all the words actually mean. So when you're saying that word, yeah, it's a swear now, but this is actually what it means. And then it's really awkward to say the F word because it actually means to impregnate somebody. And now it's weird. And some kids will still go around using it. But yeah, that's just kind of where I sit with it.
I totally agree with you, Kristen. And I think sometimes it's like a cry for attention, and they can't differentiate between negative and positive attention, but they get attention when they use that word. Wherever they are, they get a lot of attention suddenly. And by not letting that be their like response for attention, like if all of a sudden they're using that word and the teacher's on them and saying, we never use that, blah, 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 then that's going to be like a continued cycle of like, that's how I get her attention. That's how I get one-on-one time. Like, I don't know how else to ask for it.
I also think that, like, I think I walked in when Selah, you were saying that sometimes we just ignore it. I think your context, like if you're working with kids where that is the everyday language, it might actually be more beneficial to completely ignore it. And I know that sounds kind of weird and whatever, but if that's sometimes, like, you have to know your kids before you can ignore it and be like, because for some it's a cry for attention, for others it's just a language word. They're not even aware that they said it. Others they're at their wits' end, and maybe that is a bigger conversation of like, hey, you don't usually use that language. Why are we choosing that language? Because it could be, I'll admit it, I've sworn before. When I get really, really mad, it happens. And I have certain children in my household who have picked that up. And, we have conversations, but sometimes if we don't want to make a big deal about it, ignoring it can be just as effective. If it's consistent or persistent, then it might be worth exploring more. But if it's kind of an everyday language, sometimes pushing on it can actually create more of that resistance to you than elsewhere.
Yeah, it can definitely be a whole, she talked to me when I said this word. I'm going to do it again, but I'm going to make it louder. And then, everyone's looking at me now. Oh, this is great. Let's do it again. But even I'm going to scream it this time. And, when they're already craving that attention, they realize they can get it. They'll just keep doing it. Because kids love attention. Any other thoughts? All right. Well, question 3, does your children's ministry have a behavior support team? team, who would you invite to participate? How would you identify teachers, therapists, psychologists, and other knowledgeable professionals in the congregation? Are there any other ministries in your church, such as counseling ministry or mentoring ministry, that can help you address behavior issues in your group?
Um, this is something had never thought about, having like a ministry support team, and I don't know whether this means um, people who are outside of children's ministry who who have these skills, who can come in and help. So, like in our church, I know that we have teachers and well, mainly just teachers who aren't in children's ministry because they don't actually want to be around children in the weekend. So I'm like, but I wonder, yeah, what would happen if we did tap into these resources that we do have at the church and get them involved in a support role, so to speak, and what that would look like. So, yeah, it's food for thought there. And Jodie, I have to say, I love the fact that you're out in the sun over here. The sun hasn't even come up yet. And I'm like,
This is our playground behind the church, and it's finally 80 degrees here in Michigan, so soaking up as much as I can before it plummets back to 50.
I
We
think if the church is able to have someone who is assigned to kids who are very difficult, whether they're trauma or ADHD or whatever, I think it makes a world of difference in the child. I know that with my grandson, I had someone come up to me after Sunday school. I went down to pick him up and he said he did really well today. And which is encouraging because oftentimes he has just got so much energy that he just can't sit still, becomes disruptive, anxiety builds up. And he said, you know, I've worked with kids in the past. I've specialized in kids that have ADHD, and I would love to be his buddy and introduce him to other kids. And as you well know, usually kids with ADHD don't have very many friends. And so he said, I'm going to introduce him to other kids and try to see if we can't find a friend. And when we picked him up after Sunday school, there was a night and day difference in this little boy. He had met another boy by name. He had to go say goodbye to him. It's the first time that's really happened. And so just having this person who was, I'd say probably in his mid-30s, show an interest in Ollie and sit with him and explain the story. He had the story pre-written out, highlighted, activities, all they could do during story time to help relate to the story, but keep him quiet. I mean, he just went all out for this 6-year-old little boy that it just turned his experience around. So if that's possible in any church setting to identify the kids that have more difficulties, I think it really does a wonder in their experience as well as the disruptive behavior to the kids around them.
That is so awesome to hear. I love that he has that kind of support. I love those people. We in our church we actually have a lady who runs whatever. It's called the Center for TLC, and she and her team work with like children and young adults who are like severely autistic or ADD, ADHD, ODD, all the different things. And after we renovated our building, I met up with her and I said, I want to make, our spaces safer for those who may, be struggling and whatever. And she was super helpful in picking things that worked, the space that we had, crash pillows and fidgets and all of these things, like from little to big. She offered suggestions which were super helpful. She chooses to only like work in our baby room because she works with older kids all week, and I totally respect that. But she also is the one that's like, if you're ever in a situation where you need extra support, please feel free to call me out of the service and I'd be happy to help you. So it's really nice to have that. We haven't had to use that yet. But we're very blessed to have a person like that in church that is willing to be that emergency backup hand that we need.
we've gotten really, started a couple of years ago trying to get more with this sensory rooms and stuff, and we've done a big renovation at the church, so we don't have the sensory rooms like in this book that are that huge, but we have 2 that are really nice now for older kids and younger kids. And then we do the buddy breaks now where the kids come on a Friday and the parents can go out and get a break. And then we've also joined this Culture City where they do training with you, and then they give you certification, like, and then we put out these buddy bags. And if you see a sign, it means there's a buddy bag there. If your child really needs one, they can get it. And it has all these sensory things in it. And we just hired somebody to be our special needs person that's making sure all this happens. But and we on Sunday mornings, if we know which kids that really need it, and we have a buddy person for each of those kids that's with them the whole time, whether they're sitting near them or if they need to jump in, because we've got a couple of runners too. So I'm really proud of what the team's done. I'm really trying to get this, out there more, because to be honest, my son, who's, came from trauma, he definitely needs a buddy sometimes. So he's one of the kids that we are targeting. So I love to hear all this.
So Evelyn, you have a special needs ministry at your church, like official?
It's official.
Okay.
It started, it's really done real well this year now that we've got a great space for it and all that. And they've been buying stuff left and right, and we're starting to use it with the kids. So the rooms, like I said, are smaller. So we'll kind of leave the door open, have the adults sitting there. And then right now they're letting one child go in and do all this if they need a break from the noise of somewhere else. It's real calming. And it's really nice looking. I mean, I go in there sometimes just take a little nap, it's kind of nice.
Does anybody else have like an actual official, working special needs ministry at their church?
We have a specialized service. It's a 10 a.m. Sunday morning service where people with special needs, kind of on the extreme level, not just the kids with ADHD or trauma, but children and adults that have special needs. There's a special room just for them to go. And then they have numerous people that are very well trained and kind of given guidance to help with these people. Not all of them are professionals. The person overseeing the ministry is, one of the aides in the room is, but all of the other volunteers are just those that have been guided and directed with how to respond, what to do in these kind of situations. But there's one church service that these people will attend, and the room is packed. It's amazing that many people come up and say, we weren't welcome anywhere else. There was no place for them to go because they vocalized and it was disruptive. And so they just stopped going. And so this way they can go in the room, and if they're very vocal without being understood, that's okay. They can still do that. And it's such a warm room, and the people that work with them are so loving and caring that it just is the parents can stay if they choose, but we try to encourage them to go into the service and enjoy that time, with a beeper or a tag, so that if something happens, we can contact them. But they'll come back and say, this is the first actual service I've been able to really just, pour myself into without being concerned that, their daughter or son or sister or whoever it is causing problems for the people around them as they perceive it.
That's awesome. That's such a huge, need, I think, right now. And it breaks my heart that families don't feel like they can go to church because of that. I wish we could do more. We've tried starting one, but we just didn't have the people to support it. And I didn't want it to be something that's inconsistent, because those kiddos and young adults need consistency and stability. But that's so wonderful your church is able to do that, and make them feel part by having their own service. And then obviously the parents or the caregivers have that opportunity to go enjoy service and be fed themselves. So I think it's just fantastic. Anybody else have anything for special needs families?
We don't have a special needs ministry per se. We don't have any children currently in our congregation who have any special needs, but I was hired a little over 6 years ago, and one of the first things that I did was took a classroom and turned it into a sensory room, because we had like 2 kids at that point who were in our children's ministry that were on the spectrum. And I wanted to create this place where they could go if they needed something that was like the lights were dimmed, there was a body sock they could wear, there was a swing someone donated to us, there were sensory beads and just kind of stuff like that that could help them if they needed to decompress a little bit. And it was used a couple times, but it's pretty much just sat empty for the last little while. But it's there in case we do need it, in case there is a family that comes and says, can you minister to us? And we have that space for a child. One of the things that we compete against here in little Chaska, Minnesota, is maybe 5 miles away. We have a mega church. They have an amazing, lots of staff program. 15 minutes from us, there's a mega church, and their special needs ministry, I've actually talked to the lady who runs it, is unbelievable. So there was a family that had a son who was on the spectrum, and we tried and did everything we could, but it just wasn't working here. So they actually left and went to the other church, and there were no hard feelings. But as small as we are, I don't feel like we have the resources or the manpower right now to be able to offer a very specific special needs program. But after reading this book, it's something that I've been thinking about, like, is there anyone, in the congregation who, if they feel so led, or we have people that start coming with children who have special needs, would be willing to lead that ministry and have something that's available if we need it. But like I said, it's been quite a while, and so it's there if the Lord sends us somebody our way.
That's great. I love hearing that. Hopefully someday soon we all will have one and it'll be the common, because then, we need those volunteers to fill those spaces too. All right, question 4. Suppose that one of your Sunday school teachers has gotten into a power struggle with a strong-willed child. She told all of the children to sit in a circle on the floor, but the child insists on sitting in a chair a few feet from the group. He isn't hurting anyone or distracting the class, but the teacher feels disrespected. What could you do to de-escalate the situation? Could any of the strategies in this chapter help you interact more positively with the teacher?
I kind of laughed when I read this question because my Sunday school director is 80 years old. You wouldn't know it. She's about 60 in her heart and her energy levels and everything, but she is definitely old school. And 2 of my daughters teach the 4th and 5th grade Sunday school, and they let the kids, their classroom is in the church boardroom. So the chairs are the twirly ones, the really nice chairs for the board to sit in when they have their board meetings and stuff. And my girls are like, hey, you need to get up out of your chair and walk around the room, or you need to twirl around on your chair a little bit. As long as you're listening and you're paying attention and you're engaged, we don't have a problem with that. Well, there was one Sunday where the girls couldn't be there, and so my Sunday school director subbed for them, and she did not appreciate that lax atmosphere, the twirling around in the chair if needed, the getting up, the standing, the walking around. And she actually came to me and she said, I don't want to change what your girls are doing, but she's like, it just felt really disrespectful to me that they just couldn't sit still. And this is one of those examples where I was like, I tried to explain it to her from the girl's perspective and from a child development perspective, but she's 80 years old. She's like a totally different generation of how kids should be in a classroom, how they should sit, and the kids weren't being disruptive. They were just moving more than she was comfortable with. And that was one of those times where it was like, I'm just gonna let this go because she's not in there a whole lot and she's older. And we had a really good conversation about it, but it was definitely, I think if you have some of those older volunteers and we're a little more, the understanding of child development and how much they need to move and all that kind of stuff has changed so much since, our 60 and 70-year-old volunteers were younger, that I think there's an understanding there that we just kind of need to come to and say, okay, I get why you're concerned, but we're just going to let this one go because it's not disruptive and it's not, they weren't out of control and they weren't disrupting the lesson. They were paying attention, they were engaged. So, but I thought of that when I read, how could I interact more positively with the teacher? Well, I tried and she's 80 years old. So that wasn't going to change in her mind.
I think just
I think-
casting,
Go ahead.
I just think casting, I don't know if the right word is vision, but casting the understanding of expectations of kids. That it's not about rigidness. It's not that they're trying to disobey. They just have a different need in that moment. And if they're not, like my thing is, if they're not hurting, if they're not bothering, if they're not disrupting, especially, then go ahead, have a seat. We're going to continue our activity over here. If you'd like to join us, you can, and this is the spot or area you can join us at. But I would just encourage that volunteer to remember, who we're reaching in this moment. It's not an adult who can sit, or sit still or find the spot. It's a kid who may just need to be having their moment over there and then join us when they're ready. And just continue on, because obviously the more you highlight or talk about or bring attention to the wanted behavior, the more they're just going to do it. So yeah, that's my 2 cents.
I think, I read Power Struggle, and I think of my own children who would definitely do this and have done this to me while I'm teaching. And you're like, I know there's nothing wrong with why you need to sit there. Your butt needs to be here. But I think that it would be worth having the conversation, like, why don't they want to sit on the floor? For some kids, I think sitting on the floor, especially if they have like a lower back thing, it can be really uncomfortable for them, or if their butts are really bony and they're sitting on a hard floor, like that hurts. As an adult, it hurts and I don't want to sit. And so it could be that, getting carpet squares, so it could be that there is an actual issue. And I think, that conversation of like, some kids are actually doing it just because they don't want to today. And there's nothing, and it has nothing to do with anything other than in this moment today, they don't want to. And I think in that sense, to give the teacher kind of that like empowerment to be like, they can sit in that chair, but they don't have to participate. Like if you're doing an activity that requires everyone, like, what is it, telephone or whatever, where you whisper in each other's ears or you're passing something. And it can also be really disruptive. It can create more to disruptive, although they're not being disruptive. I don't know what your classes are like. In our classes, we have chairs and we alternate between them and stuff. But if I have one kid that decides I'm going to sit in a chair when everyone else is supposed to be sitting on the floor, guaranteed I will have another 4 followers who are like, oh, but I want to sit in the chair. Why can't so? Why is so-and-so? And you're like, this is chaos now. Whereas the fact that they're sitting away, we'd probably be more like, you're welcome to sit there, but we're doing our activity here. And if you want to participate in our activity, you have to come and sit here. Just because, especially with like the strong wills and stuff, you're running a brick wall. And they're gonna keep doing it, not simply because maybe at this point they even want to join in, but now they can't join in. Now they can't give in because they've already put their feet down and you're now not winning. So one of the things that, like, we have a rule, like, there are certain chairs that you do get to sit in, but at certain times you have to sit on the floor for whatever purpose, whatever reason we're doing it with. And for the kids that need to sit, well, then they can sit away, but when they're ready to join in, they come and join us. And it tends to give, when you kind of explain that to your teachers, like, they don't have to join in. Sometimes we get this idea that every child needs to be sitting in the circle so that they can participate, but you know what? They may not want to. They may have no desire to play pass the hot potato. And as long as they're not disrupting, and that's usually what we'll tell, like, I'll tell my teachers, tell them that you're welcome to sit there, but you're not allowed to be kicking the other person. You're not allowed to be banging things on your chair. You're not allowed to be like creating a disruptive thing. And kids will do that. And when they're ready to join in, they often join in. But I think, yeah, there's that balance between knowing your children. So if this is a child who is regularly digging their heels in to just sitting on the floor, then chances are you need to get those like floor pillows or move everybody up into a chair or whatever else needs to happen.
I think in the middle of a power struggle, I would, if I had the capacity and like the availability, pull that kid out of the class and discuss it with him. Because in the middle of the power struggle, these are all great things to talk about with your teachers, but you don't want to, like I've been in a situation where I've been the teacher that I've like, this person is not supporting me at all. Like they've come in, I asked for help with this kid who's disrespectful to me, and someone came in and told me I was wrong. And now all the kids see me as the wrong person, which is not the thing that it's not the appropriate time to do that in the middle of that power struggle. So being able to move that kid, like you said, Kristen, find out like what's happening with the, like, why are you sitting in this chair? And depending on the situation, like, you know, there's a million possible options for what's happening. Cause it might be that that kid just needs to hear like, they are seeing that as a sign of disrespect. I understand you want to sit in the chair and that's what you want. Your teacher sees that as you being rude to them. And sometimes they hear that and they're like, oh, I didn't realize that. I just kind of dug my heels in. Or sometimes like, I can also imagine a situation where we walk and talk until circle time is over and drop them back off after the situation is diffused. But I have been in the situation where I'm like, this isn't good for it. I don't have any classroom management now because the principal came in and told me I was wrong and to let the kid do that. And the kids can't understand the whole picture of that's not going to happen every time.
I think also like going off of that, the post conversation, finding out why the teacher was so adamant that they all sat down. Cause sometimes I think like, and even in my own, like I'm strong-willed. So when I decide something, it's usually like, no, everyone needs to do what I said. But sometimes like even with my own kids and we've been teaching them how to argue, I don't want to say argue back because that sounds really bad, but how to have discussions when they don't agree necessarily with what we've said. Because sometimes it's that I've said no all day and I'm just on a no track. And then they're like, but this doesn't even make sense. And if they can do it, you know, but I think sometimes going to the teacher and afterwards being like, so why is it important that the kids all sit on the floor? Because it could be that they don't actually have to sit on the floor. They could sit in a chair or they could sit, you know, sometimes I have some of my teachers that'll be like, you can sit on the floor or you can sit on a chair, but pick your space. You cannot be touching someone or you like, so they put the stipulations and the guidelines in like, you can't be doing this, but pick your spot. And sometimes that's being provided that as an alternative or an option can actually be freeing for our teachers that not all kids have to sit on the floor. They can do it and they can still learn and listen. Or it might mean that you need to hang out in that classroom just a little bit more to find out if it's really a necessity as they may be, you know.
I know we're not in chapter 10 yet, but I loved in chapter 10 how they started talking about using these same discipline strategies with your volunteers. And of course it's adjusted. You're not going to use the same language, but like, I feel like that I have taught now like every single age possible. And I feel like the main thing I've seen is that from kids to adults, everybody is looking for the same thing. They're all looking for validation. They're all looking like the things that work great with these trauma exposed children work great with your adults, adjusted vocabulary, adjusted how you address it. But I love that they said like doing the ACT strategy with your volunteers so they for sure heard and then like communicating all those things. I thought it was really cool.
Well, let's move into chapter 10, Hannah. Woo! Almost just lost my umbrella. Let's move into chapter 2. We got the last couple minutes. Let's skip number 1 and go on to 2. How would you do volunteers speak positively about the kids? Do they show up on time? Are they eager to continue their ministry roles when their commitments have ended? Are there any areas that need improvements? If so, which strategies from this chapter would you use to improve the morale of your team?
I really love that they provided food for the volunteers. That was one of the things I bookmarked providing food and water for the volunteers, which is something I consider with the kids, but never really thought about, like, is there capacity? Do I have volunteers that could help me provide a hot breakfast for my volunteers to really just get a chance for that, like, community? I think that, eating together is so valuable for groups of people.
So, I think the overall morale of my team is pretty good. What's so funny is I had a little kitchenette made as part of our renovation for my volunteers, so I could put treats and all the stuff in there. And I tell you what, I was so blown away. I've done juice, I've done pop, I've done snacks. Like, I don't get it. It just blows my mind. So I just stopped doing it because kids just ended up eating it because it sat there for so long and it was getting old. And so I just need to find what their thing is to feel appreciated. I do a lot of verbal things or sending, emails, texts. So it's personal rather than like a group thing. But a lot of mine, they're pretty dedicated and committed to their roles. I haven't had very many that like step down right after they're done. But we do a big Christmas thing for them though, at least. And at the end of every year where they get a gift from my team and I. So yeah, I don't know. They don't like food apparently.
For us, so I used to do a lot of the like cheesy, very like kidmin friendly kind of things at Christmas and at the end of the year, kind of twice a year, like I don't know what I do without you, and like all those like really fun things. And I was really challenged a couple of years ago. I don't even know how I got to it, but I decided to start. So at our yearly, like once at the beginning of the year, we do a big training thing when I do a Let's Talk About the kids ministry. We have a taco lunch and then we kind of do things like that. And so I started getting them to fill out Let's Talk About Me forms. And it kind of stemmed, I think it came from a school thing where that's what a teacher was sending out to her students. And because I really was wrestling with, am I doing something that makes them feel appreciated? Looking at love languages and all of that. And so in doing that, I actually learned that like 95% of my volunteers don't actually want stuff. They would much rather have me write them a note that says, hey, I think you're doing great. Like, this is what I noticed, like a thank you letter, or in the moment being like, I just love what I saw. I had a pair of Sunday school teachers that would they went above and beyond what they would like recreate the moment, and they dress up in costumes to teach the Bible stories to our grade 3-4. Like, it was phenomenal. And so I found that by doing that, I think I did a little bit better. I also asked them things like, what's your favorite chocolate? What is, your favorite drink? And so if I do gifts and stuff, I will try to make them a bit more personal. Like, oh, they like white chocolate, so I'll make sure I get them something with white chocolate. Or they don't drink coffee, they only drink apple cider. So I make sure that is what I give them instead of that. And so I think that helps. I don't have a hard time holding on to. I usually lose a couple. It's because a lot of my team is actually younger. I have some that are parents or are now serving with their children, like alongside them, as their kids are teens or young teens, junior teens. And so I'll lose a couple of our teenagers because they'll be like, actually, I don't think I like kids ministry. And I'm like, that's great. Let's go get you plugged in. Like, so I kind of make sure that if they're leaving to another ministry, and they often leave for the tech, and that kind of stuff. But I find that, yeah, our volunteers come back, but that it really did make a difference, I think, in how they feel. It wasn't just like, oh, now I've got chocolates and now I've got these little things that I don't even like or want. Many of them said, I don't want little things. I'd rather it be this way. For my like Sunday school, and I really tried to be more invested in I can't do them all. I find it really hard to get my children's church teachers to show up, because we only do children's church like in the middle of the service and on. So for them to come even earlier was very difficult. I remember asking my nursery workers to show up at, 10:30 instead of 10:45 when the service starts. The nursery is all service, and that was much too much to ask. And so I kind of haven't figured out how to do things for them, but I hold a monthly meeting with my Sunday school teachers. And so every kind of couple of months, I'll bring in like a coffee, or I'll ask like, what do you want from this store? And then that's what we'll bring in, or we'll do donuts or different things like that as a means to kind of thank them. I have a leadership team that we only meet 4 times a year. So once a year I get drinks or whatever. And yeah, like they tend to be really receptive of that kind of stuff. So I think the big thing is to figure out, what does your team actually want? And for me, it was hard because when I was at that stage, writing thank you letters, and not thank you, sorry, words of encouragement notes, like encouragement is not my love language at all. Like it's the bottom, it's the 0. And so it was a lot. And I remember trying to do it one Christmas, and I don't recommend doing them. Like I do weekly kind of thank you encouragement notes to one volunteer. I send birthday cards, and on their birthday, they'll get like a little thank you note included in their birthday card, but just things to say like, hey, I recognize you. I see you. I'm appreciative that you're a part of our team.
I'm going to move on to the next question because I want to make sure I ask this of you guys, because I think this is very important. Do you do a good job of caring for yourself? Did you recognize any of the signs of compassion fatigue that was described in this chapter? As you develop your ministry, how will you nourish your own needs in order to make sure that you are capable of supporting the children and volunteers who rely on you? And hence the reason why we're doing the next book, Don't Quit.
I found it really interesting that this was the very last thing that he talked about in the book. So I typically do not do a good job taking care of myself. When I look at the list that he gave at the top of page 199, yeah, I do all of them sort of, but not probably as well as I could. And to take really, really good care of myself, my pastor and the board approved that I could take a sabbatical this summer. So I'm completely disconnecting from everyone and everything at church for 13 weeks this summer, and really have intentions of putting together a list, or not a schedule per se, but like, these are the things that I need to do to take care of myself and to do it well, and implementing those. And will have time to think about that. I'm going to be traveling a little bit. I'll have some time by myself. So to me, that's kind of a first step in the right direction. I was recently diagnosed with diabetes, so I kind of have to take care of myself more than I used to. So the physical needs have definitely bumped up to the top of the list of things that I need to do to take care of myself. And my 4 oldest girls are all adults. I still have a 14-year-old that's a freshman in high school. So it's a little bit easier now to like put myself first, because I don't need to be taking care of my kids as much as I used to. They all are still at home because they're in college and stuff like that. But yeah, I was kind of convicted by that. And I don't know that I have any compassion fatigue. I didn't really relate to that, but I do need to get better at taking care of myself.
I majorly struggled with compassion fatigue at the beginning when I first started this job. And if you haven't before, reading When Helping Hurts helped me a lot be able to establish appropriate boundaries for myself, because I would just take on a huge amount of guilt. We have a dynamic where people will ask me to do things like drive them to the emergency room and watch their kids for 5 hours, and things that I would struggle with huge amounts of guilt when I was like, I have to say no, even though I don't have like a quote unquote reason to say no. So it helped me a lot learning about those things, but I still struggle with those. I probably should reread it, honestly.
I definitely highlighted and starred. I loved the airline comparison where it's like your flight attendant always says, you know, should the cabin lose pressure, oxygen masks will drop from overhead. Please pick over your mouth and then assist others. I'm like sitting there going, okay, God, because I'm not very good at taking care of myself. And I kind of felt like that this past week, just with we had an Easter event, and then Palm Sunday, Easter event, Good Friday, Easter Sunday. I mean, I know all of us are, this the Super Bowl week that we had. But rather than taking my normal Monday off, I was already doing stuff. And I'm like, Jody, you need to do it. Like you just have to put that stuff aside. Like God is not going to be angry at you because, you're not doing every single little thing. So I need to be better about taking care of myself and truly taking my day off for myself and not doing work.
When I started, I new job, young children, lots going on in our life. And I pretty much burnt out. I think within the first year I was done. It was in a bad spot. I wasn't taking care of myself spiritually. I wasn't doing it physically, mentally, emotionally. And I wish I could be like, oh yeah. And then things changed and they got better, and they didn't. I just learned how to do more under more stress. And then I would say that during COVID, I suddenly realized just how important it was to have structures in place. COVID was rough for our family. We had some just personal stuff that went on top of trying to balance two jobs in our, not my job, but mine and my husband's, and we're all at home and we're in this little tiny place. And coming from that, I've created structures now that have allowed, not great, there's still some work that needs to be done, but I started to look through my ministry and be like, what don't I need to be in charge of? In what ways can I enable other people to come in so that I can say, I can't this week, I didn't get to that, but I know that somebody else can. And so things like prep, I had a mom at one point, and now I had two older ladies that would just come in once a week. I just made sure the lesson was done, and they had kind of the things that I needed to provide them. So it might be something off the laptop or the page numbers for things, and they handle it all so that if something happens, and in our case, my daughter ended up having emergency surgery, that we were out for 2 weeks. And I knew that in those 2 weeks, everything was taken care of. I've taught people how to do the registration. Our host teams for our church are capable of, doing all of that. At the same time, I also started to be much more intentional about my own time and recognizing that, as a mom, it's hard. I don't know how many of you, we need to take care of our families. We need to do all of this. And when you're running, even our Super Bowl weeks, Easter, Christmas, VBS, all of those things, it gets hard to do it all, and recognizing that, the dishes will still be there tomorrow. Actually, there'll probably be more, but that's okay. They're still coming back, and learning to let things go. I actually remember having a counselor, I was telling her, I'm done. I want to walk away. And she's like, but what would happen if you didn't do it? I was like, oh, it would fall apart. It would be horrible. And she's like, would it? And go figure. That evening I had a meltdown, and I was like, I'm done. I'm leaving. I'm going to the room. Nobody bother me. And you know what? It was an amazing night. My husband did everything, but I think sometimes we convince ourselves that everything has to run through us, that we have to carry the weight and make sure all the plates are spinning. And we've now denied somebody that. And I think I've had to learn a lot about, taking holiday. My first 3 years, it was actually more stress to stay home with my children when I was sick than to go to work. So I didn't take a sick day. I'm not talking puking. I'm just talking major headaches or, COVID didn't exist yet. And in COVID, I learned, you got to take those sick days. Nobody wants you in work if you're so much as sniffing. So learn to take the sick days and recognize the value in that. Sought outside of my church. One of the things that I'd been told right from the get-go had been, get connected outside. Go to another church for one other thing, have people outside. And so I actually joined a mom's group from another church at that stage in my life. And it was the most life-giving thing I had, because I didn't have to be on. I don't know, those of you who run moms groups, when you're there, even if you are a mom who's maybe not the one speaking at the front, it's still kind of your ministry. You still have to be on, you still have to be, people still expect things from you. And when you go to some other church, there is no expectation. Nobody is like, oh, you should know the answer, or why aren't you? and you release yourself from that. And I found that to be one of the best things in that time of life. And so like my husband and I right now are looking for a small group outside of our church, because we just want to be able to go someplace where we can just like relax. And I think that that is really important when it comes to taking care of ourselves, is that we do find spaces, and maybe there is some if you have a big enough church where you can be present in a thing. Another one we have a ladies Bible study, and I would go to that, and it's a bunch of older ladies, and it was phenomenal. Like they were just amazing, and I wasn't expected to do anything. I just had to show up with my book and contribute if I felt like it on that day. And I think sometimes we have to find those things and release from ourselves that it needs to all go through me, or I need to be the one to do it. They will not do it the way you want them to do it. I can promise you that. There are still weeks when I go like, oh, I should just do it myself. But honestly, that day that you're sick and you're like, I need to make sure, no, you've got people to do it, and they're going to do it. And believe it or not, your ministries can still run if you are not there.
I know we're past time, but I've been studying a lot on rest and Sabbath, and God has been majorly convicting me about the stress that I put on this stuff about me getting things done, and I don't have time to rest. I need to go. And he'll be like, this is my ministry. If I said it's gonna work, it's gonna work. Like, why do you think you're gonna handle this better than I will? And like, God is so much bigger than we are, and he commands us to rest. And in the Old Testament, the punishment for not taking the Sabbath is the death penalty. So like, he commands it from us. And I don't know, I think it's a relatively familiar feeling to be like, I have guilt when I rest. And that's like so mismatched from, it's a direct command from God, and yet I've turned it into something I feel guilty for.
I
I
think
love that.
Scripture
Not
is
doing
very clear on making our relationship with God the utmost priority. And spiritually, that means with our prayer, with our Bible study, with our personal relationship with Him. And then if we're married, then our spouse and our children. And Josh Denhart, who does the volunteer training classes, has always said, delegate your responsibilities so that if you walked out the door, it would continue without you, because none of us are invincible. And so we need to work with a team of people that can carry on our responsibilities. And it's hard because we all want to feel like, oh, it will collapse without me, but it won't. You know, if you walked out today, someone would fill in, maybe not as well, maybe do things differently, but your personal relationship has to be something that is very well taken care of. Because if you're not where you are personally with God, none of the ministries that you're doing are going to be effective, because it's just a constant pressure over your head. And having been through ministries and raised my kids and done all of those things, you look back and you say, what was most important? You know, did my relationship at home suffer? The ministries all went on without me. When I left, everybody picked up and took over. But my family and my husband and my relationship with God has to be the priority. And that's included in resting. You have to be your best self. And if that means that you take a couple of hours off on a Sunday afternoon, and if your rest is going after church by yourself, then do it. You have to do what's best for you, because you're not going to be an effective servant if you're not personally where you should be.
And I think that's a good ending point. Great wisdom from Becky. Becky, could you actually close us in prayer for today?
Sure.
Thank you.
Heavenly Father, we pray that what we do will bring you glory. We want to reach children with the gospel of Christ. We want to help families. But we also need to help ourselves. We need to be the person walking with you that you've intended us to be. Lord, sometimes we can get so caught up in the busyness of life, we forget what the priorities are. Are we doing it for ourselves, or actually are we doing it for your glory? Ministries are not more important than people, and help us to remember that. Help us to remember what our responsibilities and our obligations are, but also what our God-given roles are. Lord, we worry about children. We worry especially about those that have gone through trauma. Help us to be sensitive to their needs, sensitive to their parents who are dealing with this. to communicate with them, to utilize the principles and the ideas that we have found in this book to further our understanding of what these dear children have gone through. There are adults working on our ministry that have gone through trauma and it hasn't been recognized. So open our eyes to this. Help us to be a spiritual guide for some of these people, to be loving and caring and looking for their best interest, not what the program needs, Lord, but what the individuals need. Pray that you would give us wisdom and guidance in this regard. We thank you for the leadership and the comments and everything that has been expressed in this group, and just pray that as we meet with the author next week, Lord, that it would just be more insightful in how we can deal with those people in our lives that just aren't the same. To love them, no matter what their situation, to share your love with them, to know that they belong, that they can be in the same group that we're in and have just as much impact, even if they're different. Lord, we want to be sensitive to the needs of others and to take care of ourselves as well. Lord, we just lift this time up to you and thank you for these ladies and for their jobs, and bless them in their work and their ministries and in their home. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you. All right, guys, just if you have any other questions you can think of or thoughts, comments, drop them on the Facebook page so I can send them along, or just bring them with you next week. We gave them a few to start out with, and I'm sure our conversations will just kind of roll naturally next Thursday. So I'll see y'all at 1:30. Have a great day.